So before diving into the panel discussion, I'll put out a quick presentation to set the context. To start with, some interesting statistics on the total vehicle that has been registered for the financial year 24. So a total of 25 million vehicles were registered. The road transport vehicles were registered in the financial year 24. The numbers are 10% higher compared to the previous financial year, which was financial year 23. And the highest share was accounted to two-wheelers, which was close to 70%, followed by light motor vehicles, which is actually at 20%. Whereas goods vehicle, the values were very less than 5%. And in terms of fuel, based on fuel, from the fuel standpoint, it was petrol that was leading the entire market share up to 80%, followed by diesel at 10%. Whereas battery-operated vehicles were found to be at 7%. The number was previously 5%. The number increased to close to 7%. Again, specifically in battery segment vehicles, it is two-wheelers that is dominating with close to 55% shares, and then there is three-wheelers, which is close to 35% shares. Talking about the total oil consumption, India in the financial year 24 has imported close to 230 million tons of crude oil. The numbers are not very much. It is more or less same to the previous financial year, which was 23. But then the imports dependencies has actually increased. Which is soaring still at the number at 88%. Out of the total oil consumption, 44% was accounted to the transport sector, where the oil consumption is the one which is actually emitting a lot of CO2 emissions, where transport sector is at 12% of the national overall emission inventory. And in terms of total freight and passenger sectors, the emissions are sort of tripled all the way from 2000 onwards. Especially the truck segments contribute to sort of 38% of fuel consumption as well as the CO2 emissions, followed by passenger cars, which is actually at 25%, and then the combination of two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which is at 20%. So far, the segments like passenger cars, heavy-duty vehicles, and light and medium commercial vehicles have got fuel efficiency standards as on date in India. So passenger cars, as we know, it's CAFE 1 and CAFE 2 standards, corporate average fuel efficiency norms, which has been rolled out since 2017, and the next one was rolled out in the year 2022. And heavy-duty vehicles, gross vehicle weight about 12 tons till 49 tons has got phase 1 and phase 2 emission standards, whereas light and medium-duty vehicles have got only phase 1 standard, phase 2 has not yet been notified. Whereas CAFE 3 and 4 norms for passenger cars are being proposed, and it's currently under consideration by the Government of India. So these are some global fuel consumption standards for passenger cars. The right graphs actually shows all the global countries where CAFE norms has been standardized. On the left, you can see the 1, 2 norms for India, and 3 and 4 are the proposed norms, which is currently under consideration to be finalized. Some high-level numbers from the countries globally, which is China, which is planning to standardize to a number 98 by 2025. We have US 60 gram CO2 per kilometer by 2032, and EU being with a very promising target of 100% electrification by 2035. And some numbers in terms of heavy duty, how global countries are standardizing on this. Again, EU is at the forefront with 90% reduction from the relative to 2019 by 2040, followed by US at 60% and China, which is at 25%. With this, I would like to end my presentation and hand it over to Ashok. Thank you.
Am I audible? Thanks, Murthy, for the wonderful presentation and setting the context. We have a wonderful panelist with me, and before I start the discussion, I will let each panelist to give a short introduction of themselves. We all know Drew since from the morning, so everybody must be knowing Drew. But yes, some of the panelists, it would be good if give just a short introduction.
Hello everyone, my name is Mangesh Natu. I am a senior manager with EY. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Very good or excellent sort of event, right? As far as background goes, I am working in the EY team, which we sort of focus on the strategy angle of the disruption caused by the sort of new age mobility related topics, right? We work with automotive OEMs and tier ones, in terms of trying to identify diversification strategies, growth strategies, and any sort of due diligence studies. From a background perspective, I am a mechanical engineer, I have an MBA, and I've worked in the auto industry for close to 18 years with OEMs, tier ones in product development, program management, and I've done a bit of consulting as well.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Deepak Suri. I'm working with Bureau of Energy Efficiency, Government of India. So I'm there as a senior sector expert. So I'm looking after the transportation and various kind of policies related to the transportation, like CAFE norms for the passenger cars and for the HDVs. So this is, thanks a lot. I'm a mechanical engineer having experience of around 20 years.
Anumita Roychowdhury from Center for Science and Environment, and very deeply involved with clean air agenda and especially driving the vehicle technology and clean fuel trajectory, but now to push the agenda towards zero emissions.
Good afternoon. This is Rashmi Urdhwareshe. I'm former director, Automotive Research Association of India. During my tenure at ARAI, I worked there for 37 years, worked on emission regulations, fuel efficiency regulations, creation of technologies to meet those regulations. And post my retirement from ARAI, I'm working as independent director on various automotive companies and also founding director at Pune Knowledge Cluster, which is set up by Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India.
Oh no. We can skip Bruce. All right. So, as Murthy has said, in his presentation, he has talking about the different vehicle segments which have the fuel consumption standards. Now, fuel consumption standard, it sounds very, technical. So, I mean, that most of our audience must be not from a technical background. So, we'll try to keep our discussion as simple and easy so that it would be easily absorbable to the mass audience. Now, in India, we have a very good example. I would say a success story of light duty vehicle standards, which was rolled, I think, first phase in 2017, and then it has come out on a long way. Then we have the phase 2 also, and it has really started the introduction of new technology into the market, right? I mean, 5 years back, we were not having vehicles with the newer technologies, but now we see a lot of electrics rolling on the road. We have hybrids also coming. So I would say light duty vehicle standard has really come out well, and it has set an example for India. So I would start this discussion with B. He is on the hot seat right now. So the question would be, can we replicate this LDV, the way the LDV success story, can we replicate it to the other vehicle segments? So what's your take on this?
For the LDV you are talking about?
I mean, we have the LDV as a success story. So you can talk about the LDV first, that how are we making the stringency levels, or when is the next stage of standards to come, and whether we will be able to replicate this for the other vehicle segments, because we need the newer technologies and the electrification for the other segments too.
Yeah, as of now, like BE has already proposed CAFE 3 and CAFE 4 norms, which are under discussion with the Ministry of Power right now. So you will be getting some good news, and then whenever they are out. And now coming to the LDV, so it's coming, it's related to the commercial vehicles. So commercial vehicles come, this medium commercial, heavy duty, and the LCVs. So LCVs was one of the N1 category, which was like kind of missed out, or which was not there. So that is also one of the category that we will be working with the stakeholders. So that is one point. Second point is related to the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers EV penetration. So like BE is working on having the star rating program for the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers. That will be coming soon, or like we'll be proposing it. So that is the second point that we are working upon, to how to have the EV penetration in India. So this is there. And next, related to in the HDV segment also, like right now what we were focused upon was basically the diesel vehicle, but now it will be like more focused upon the other fuels which are available, like the CNG, LNG. So all those things will also be coming into the picture. So that is there as of now.
Thanks, Deepak. I think in India, we really need a strong push in terms of the regulations, and you have rightly picked up those vehicle segments which were lagging behind, right? So
Yeah, that
we
was
are
missed out. And
yeah. So
we need to
two-wheeler,
work upon.
three-wheeler, I think that's really interesting segment that we should be looking. So my next question would be to Drew. Drew, in the past, you have seen that the light-duty vehicle standards, I mean, it has been imposed for past 7 years, I guess 7 or 8 years, and it has not really triggered the electric vehicles to that extent. If I pick a number, it's, I guess, just close to 2% that we have in India. And if you look across other regions, for example, Europe, US, or China, where similar the light duty vehicle standards have come up, but there the rate of growth of the electrics is really high. I mean, in Europe, we are seeing 20% of electrics, close to 20% or more than that. In China, still higher. So, would like to understand your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So, one of the challenges we have as policymakers in the world transitioning from the internal combustion vehicle to the electric vehicle is what is the appropriate annual rate of improvement in the standards. So historically, for the past 20 years or more, when the ICCT goes and provides advice to governments about what the annual rate of improvement should be for fuel economy, CO2, greenhouse gas standards, what we generally call supply side standards, the range was somewhere between 3 and 6% annual rate of improvement. And that generally was what manufacturers could achieve by retooling their vehicles kind of at the pace that they would typically do it within 4 or 5 year windows. We are now in a new world where there is the option for electric vehicles. We give electric vehicles a 0 tailpipe when you're giving them those, when they comply with the standards for compliance credit. And so when you look across the world, the annual rate of improvement in standards that are driving electrification are far higher than that. So in the US, for example, where we just finished standards, they're 10% or more. So let's say double what the rate of improvement has been, and that tends to drive electrification. So that's one thing that, you know, the BEE might want to consider in setting fuel economy standards. The other question is, if India is trying to transition not only to deal with climate change and oil security, but also to make sure that the green industrial transition doesn't leave India behind, right? If you're worried about jobs and economic growth, then at least from my perspective, but not only from my perspective, but generally the vast majority of the vehicle manufacturers and the investors around the world believe that electric vehicles are the future, and that the internal combustion vehicle, including hybrids, are the thing of the past. And that if you continue to invest in dead-end technologies, that will not lead to economic growth. There are some manufacturers that still believe that we should continue in that technology. But just as typewriter manufacturers are no longer prospering, eventually those manufacturers of internal combustion vehicles will also not have a market anymore. And so the difficult challenge that India faces, and it is an absolutely difficult challenge, is how fast to grow and to transition to electric vehicles when you have some manufacturers that would rather not go there. In the United States, where I just took part in the development of standards, we were fortunate enough to have General Motors and Ford and Stellantis, the three major domestic manufacturers, all committed to the EV transition. Right? That's not the case in India, so I sympathize. Right? At the same time, just to read out some numbers, so Europe went from 3% EV sales share in 2019 to 10% in 2020 to 17% in 2021 and then 20 in 2022. That was driven by their CO2 standards, supported by fiscal incentives, but the CO2 standards went into effect 2020 and 2021, and you saw a massive jump. Right. So those CO2 standards can absolutely drive the transition, and quite fast. Right. So Europe went from 3%, roughly where India is, to 20% in 4 years. India is now at 2%, and the proposal from BEE gets to 12% in 2032. Right. That is way behind the rest of the world, way behind. So my only point here is to say, and it's India's choice, of course, but you're not limited by the amount of growth that can occur in the transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. That's been seen in Europe, that's been seen in China even more strongly, that's even been seen in the US. The US went from 2% to 10% from 2019 to 2023. Right? Again, substantial growth. Right? So the proposal that's currently on the table and being discussed in India would not really catapult the country forward into the EV revolution and the green industrial transition. So just to be clear about that, and I, again, sympathize with the challenge. You've got manufacturers that are on both sides, so it's difficult. But it's important to just recognize where the facts are. Thanks.
Thanks, Dhruv, for this. I think you have touched the right words, that India is still lagging behind. A lot more to be done, and at the same time, our regulations have super credits or multipliers, which is kind of subduing the exact adoption that should be done. But before we come to that question of the multipliers, I would request Rashmi ma'am to share her thoughts, because you have been seeing the industry for a very long time, and India as a market is different, right? I mean, I have seen in my career, many OEMs from US and Europe, when they come to India, they just find that India is very different. So it's not what that they can do in their parent country and then try to replicate and it works. So please share your thoughts on this.
Sure. Just to highlight how different we are talking about FE norms and how they can push electrification. If you look at how the growth of electrification has happened in two-wheeler segment without any FE norms. So that's a classical example how the cost sensitivity of the market, readiness of infrastructure on charging, and TCO basically in favor of electrifications have proved to be the major factors other than the FE norms. That's one point. Second is with respect to even the passenger car fuel efficiency norms, we have notified, and thanks to BE and all those agencies who have worked relentlessly looking at the data, looking at what we can achieve, and have announced certain plans, and have the third stage now also coming in reality. We have to be mindful of the fact that the transition of BS6 has already done a bit on the cost sensitive market, So pushing FE norms in a manner which will basically sidetrack the benefits which are otherwise coming in from BS6 introduction might have a triggering effect. The third point is on the commercial vehicle FE norms. Currently, we have only the data coming in from constant speed fuel efficiency, which is very different than what actually would result into the benefits as seen on a dynamic vector-based test cycle, as is being talked about, but not yet finalized for the country. So that segment needs a very different approach altogether. So my view is for India, a pragmatic approach sectoral will prove to be beneficial. We can combine FE norms along with ZEV targets for sectors. So that's my, my feeling and my data also, working with the industry as well as government.
Thanks, Rashmi ma'am. I think the point that I've taken is that we can amalgamate the good things from other regions, standards, and then we can devise something for India which will be, very typical for Indian market, and it should work really well. Thanks, ma'am, for that. My next question would be to Anumita. I mean, we all know that you have worked for the buses, for CNG buses quite a lot. And in this discussion, we'll be talking about the standards. The buses have been electrified quite a lot. I mean, FAME has worked out really well for the buses. Now, can we do something about trucks, electrification? In the morning also we have discussed how the electric trucks electrification can be a difficult task. Now my take is that standards can play a role if we have a very stringent HDV standard, so it will push electrification even in the trucks. So please share your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Ashok. So, well, at this moment, we still do not have, in that sense, a standard for trucks in a way that it can drive technology innovations to the way that we really would want to see. And, but other than making the statement that we need technology forcing standards, it's more important to draw some lessons from the experience that we already have with the passenger cars, right? Because this is only about whether it's trucks, two-wheeler, three-wheelers, or other light commercial vehicles. It's about extending, it's expanding the orbit of the regulation for all vehicle segments. But more important is to draw the lesson for all segments. And here I would like to draw first some parallel with the learning from the passenger cars. So we have already gone through one phase, the first CAFE norms, 2018, then 2023. Clearly, that was a missed opportunity, right? Because the benchmark that we had set at that point of time, the industry was pretty close in terms of margin to meet those standards. In fact, the standards were not even as good as the front-runner models that had already achieved the level in the market, right? So now is the time, whether we are looking at trucks or the next phase for the passenger cars, it is absolutely critical to understand, therefore, the baseline and where do we want to push, how do we want to set the targets. Now, the big challenge today is that the country, that we are evolving several pieces of policies and regulations around EV, but with no clarity about the target that we need to meet by, say, 2030 and then beyond. So which means it is not giving us any clear long-term policy view that how stringent our standards need to be, whether to drive electrification of cars or trucks, because it is that what it is going to determine. And that's the critical point that we really want to make. So are we really talking about 30% average in 2030, or are we talking about Niti Aayog's ambition of 70%? But there has to be a clarity around that. Now, because we do not have mandate and target, the only regulatory instrument that is available to us to drive the market is fuel economy standards, which is a notified standard mandatory to meet. So we cannot, mess around with it. We have to take it seriously. So in terms of trucks, yes, a lot will depend on the profiling of what it is right now in terms of where the ICE models are in terms of the fuel economy level, and then to what extent we can promote electrification of trucks, but that will be more very niche and as per use cases. So it will still not be like a corporate average kind of an approach that you take immediately, and therefore there is still a lot more experiments to happen immediately, but we clearly need a roadmap for electrification of trucks, so that what kind of use cases we pick up to electrify. But I would like to make a point on cars more effectively, because the standards are getting made right now, okay? And we don't want to miss this opportunity that you have created with the community around, right? And therefore, I would really like to say that we already have some numbers on the table. Good to begin with, but we are diehard optimists, and we would certainly like to see the 2032 numbers to be more stringent, given the fact that we don't want to be in a position where the technology lag with the global market gets much wider, and that it takes much longer time for us to catch up. But at the same time, it is absolutely essential to underscore the fact that we have to now rethink all the giveaways that we have in the regulations. So even today, we are saying that we want to give extra points for regenerative braking, start and stop, multiple gears, which are mainstream technology. Even hybrid is a mainstream technology. And you don't create incentive for mainstream technologies, right? And you have to meet regulations to drive innovation. So that's where we really want to see it. And the ultimate point that I want to make, the reason why we need to have very effective standards so that we can begin to see the scale and speed of electrification, is also because the government of India currently is promoting all other different policies to build the value chain around EVs. So today you are talking about battery manufacturing, cell manufacturing, you are talking about the accessing critical minerals. But all that investment will remain a non-starter if we do not have committed demand in the market. So therefore, here government's own policies are going to be at conflict with each other. And if we do not have good regulations, then even our own manufacturers, the local India homegrown manufacturers, who are now our front runners and becoming increasingly more ambitious about building their EV portfolio, then you are actually penalizing them by incentivizing the laggards. And that should not happen. So I think the whole message, whether you talk about trucks or you talk about cars or any other segment, is essentially that. And the weakest point currently today is that the consumers. Now, even though in India, consumers are hugely price sensitive and fuel efficiency sensitive, but because we have not played our role well enough to inform them that how FE regulations translate into their personal fuel saving, the range that they're expected to get. So when you say WLTP cycle testing, right, it is all about real world performance, that you are trying to bridge the gap between the lab and the real world. And today we know that many people will recall in Delhi that some of the car models actually faced problem when the consumers complained that they are not getting the range that they had promised. So a lot of these things can actually get addressed if the testing methods for CAFE and emission standards improve and you adopt WLTP, etc. So we have to have a lot more deliberate, transparent outreach strategies for the consumer so they can become the driver of the change that we are looking for.
Thanks, Anumita. I think you have raised a lot of keywords for the conversation. So we have the long-term view to be taken care of, the mainstream technologies, I mean the off-cycle technologies needs to be phased out, then the demand creation, and then the consumer benefits. So we'll be touching upon all the, and not the least the WLTP implementation. So we'll be touching upon these points. I'll take the, but yeah, before we switch to this, I'll ask Mr. Mangesh. I mean, Mangesh, you are the our face of the industry, so you can give us the insider information because you have been interacting with the industry quite a lot, right? So, as Anumita has said, that it should not be a missed opportunity for us. So, I'll just pick the word opportunity. If we have a stringent standard, how can we convert this as an opportunity for India? I mean, we have seen in the media that India has an ambition, right? We want to become Viksit Bharat. We want to become an export hub. So if we have a stringent standard, it will spur new technologies to be brought in. And if we become an export hub, so it will really work well for India. So what's your take on this? And is the supply chain available in India, and how we can take that forward?
Great. Thanks, Ashok. That's a good question. This is a tricky question as well, right? I mean, if you look at Indian OEMs right now, they are very vertically integrated in terms of their internal combustion engine supply chains, right? They start with the raw material, they have their engines, they have their transmissions, and that's for the OEMs. For tier ones, there are many sort of global supply bases, like there are globally excellent sort of suppliers who are supplying to essentially global OEMs. And if we rapidly sort of scale down the ICE related operations, right, there is a risk that a large portion of that employee base, right, will be left with nothing to do. So in terms of all the government policies, a very, very robust sort of retraining or reskilling program has to be also sort of thought of, right? Now, if we specifically go back to EV or battery electric vehicle related supply chains, right? We can start with the battery, which is about 30-40% of the BOM. The battery also we can split up into its essential components. Right now, we know material-wise we don't have any access. There is some discovery going on in Kashmir and all, which puts us India right up on the map, but it's still a discovery at this moment. What I was reading earlier, from discovery to commercialization could be anywhere between 10 to 12 years. So any discussions we have with industry, they are not counting on any locally sourced raw material, right? Raw material could be in multiple different ways. You could have brine, spodumene, or clay and things like that. That's too technical, we can skip that. So once that is done, then for a refining sort of capacity, right now, a lot of it is very concentrated elsewhere. Having said that, that technology will be available, right? From setting up a plant to commercialization could still be a 3 to 5 year sort of time horizon. After refining, we have the cathode and the electrode sort of manufacturing, the cell manufacturing, right? All those things are still maybe 2 to 3 years down the line at a commercial scale. In the two-wheeler space, we know Ola already is manufacturing cells for their own consumption, but I don't think any locally manufactured cells are readily available at this point. So from a cell perspective, we are still about 2 to 3 years at least, which will be based on imported components, right? So that's from the battery perspective. Other components, I think motors and inverters are being made here. Some of the power electronic stuff, the semiconductors, right? So that is still being made overseas. That is a purely scale economy game. We don't see that portion coming to India anytime soon, at least from an automotive application perspective, right? So that's basically the key components within the battery electric vehicle value chain, right? So there's still time for those components to be localized, and there's that risk where if we rapidly sort of transition to battery electric vehicles, there might be an employment problem, which the government has to sort of think ahead of time. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Mangesh. Localization is important, and I think any standard can be supported only if we have a robust localization in India. So, my next question is to Deepak. We have off-cycle credits defined in our light-duty vehicle standards. Now, those off-cycle credits have been existing for many years. I guess 7-8 years is quite a long time, and now we can see in each and every vehicle having a start-stop or a 6-speed. So, is it time to phase it out and bring in some new technologies?
Right now, I cannot comment on this particulars.
Because globally we have seen that there is a laundry list of technologies that are available and being offered as off-cycle credits, and probably having a newer technologies could be helpful.
There might be many other new technologies that will be coming, but like I cannot comment on like whether it should be removed or not right now on this particular. I would like to say something.
Yeah, ma'am.
Those off-site, credits may not be right now the priority for us. We have several other aspects to be addressed before we migrate to the next level of giving credits. That's the current thought in regulators' mind.
So my next question would be to Drew. Earlier in this discussion, we picked up a point of multipliers, and we have very high multipliers right now. In the Cafe 2, we had a multiplier of 3, and in the new proposed Cafe 3, I think it has again increased one more to 4. So, is it the right path that we are choosing? Because in other regions, I mean, they had the regulations earlier than India, so even if they had multipliers, it was early. So is it apt to have such higher multipliers for the later stage?
Right. I appreciate the question. I'll go back quickly and both agree and politely disagree with my colleague to the right. I agree wholeheartedly that the regulatory design of heavy-duty vehicle fuel economy standards in India is deeply flawed and difficult to build a good program upon. I would say that outsourcing regulatory design to accounting firms is a bad idea, and I would suggest strongly never to do that again. One point of clarification, though, even with India's current grid mix, which, by the way, is going to clean up over time and get more and more renewables in it, but even with the current grid mix as it stands, the air pollution benefits from electric vehicles are better than internal combustion vehicles. Okay, so there is no trade-off there between air pollution standards and, all right. On the question of multipliers, and I'm getting my own mind around the regulatory design that's been proposed by BEE. Yeah, as you said, Ashok, so multipliers are typically used when you have really advanced technologies. A great example is fuel cell technologies. So EPA put, I think, a multiplier of 4, maybe even 5 in its previous regulation in order to give big credits, right, to those manufacturers that really wanted to invest into an expensive and novel and difficult new technology. Very strongly supportive of that. Those level of multipliers are always given only to those technologies which will not become significant in their penetration of the market. To have a multiplier of 4 for EV technologies that are forecast to be right now 2%, some manufacturers are at 14 or 15%, will be at 30% worst case scenario in 2030. That just blatantly, wildly, explicitly waters down the standard, right, in a huge way. And so, you know, I keep trying to think, well, how do we think about this regulatory design? It certainly does try to get manufacturers to, you know, build electric vehicles, but it waters down the standard so much that at the end of the day, you don't get very many, right? You're looking at 2% today and going to a paltry 12% in 2032. That's slower than your typical improvement just with internal combustion vehicle technology standards. So I think at the end of the day, that level of multiplier is not appropriate for this point in time for battery electric vehicles that are going from niche to mainstream, right? And won't drive the levels of battery technology that you need in order to join in a substantial way the transition to EVs and all of the economic development that flows from it, and all the other benefits as well. So I think that's where I'm coming out on that. Thanks.
Absolutely true. I think it's really time that the new standard should have a phase down defined early on, so that it's very clear to the industry that how the standard is going to move. In fact, Anumita has also put up the keyword that the long-term view should be very clear. So the industry would really appreciate if the standards set out very clear view that in the coming 5 years or 10 years, this is how the technologies should be coming, or this is how the standard demands it. So my next question would be to Rashmi ma'am. In the discussion, we have got the keyword WLTP. Now, India has been part of the data generation process, I think, long back, and there has been a discussion that it should be, implemented in India, but still there is, we don't have a WLTP in picture. So you can explain more that what's hindering it.
There was a lot of discussion about the benefits that we are going to get out of it post or beyond BS6. So obviously it was seen as one opportunity that we can create in between BS6 to BS7 migration. So that's the direction in which the dialogue began. It also started with the industry's discomfort. Although India had participated, created data from the Indian vehicles themselves in participating into WLTP test cycle development. So we are not new to this concept, and everybody knew that that is coming in. The only hesitation from the industry has been, why are you pushing us two different regulations to us? So combine it with the next stage emission norms. That is what was being discussed. Also, WLTP by itself doesn't make any regulatory framework unless with it comes the emission targets. So that is where the discussion has led. There's no conclusion as such. From ARAI side, we have been pushing it. From Anumita, you will remember our discussion also. So I fully endorse the view that yes, of course, that's one benefit which India must reap. At what time, whether in isolation or along with the next stage emission norms, that's the only thing. The conclusion has to be yet reached.
Thanks, ma'am. My next question would be, I would just throw it to all the panelists. In India, this question is very typically for light duty vehicle. We know that the light duty vehicle segment, the manufacturers are kind of split in terms of what kind of technologies that they prefer. Now, the standards are by default technology neutral. So and it should promote technology neutrality, but the preference of some manufacturers can become a hindrance. And is it the hindrance that we should be thinking, or it should be the right communication that we should be making, that stringent target should be beneficial, and it should promote competitiveness. It should create new opportunities, and everyone should be profitable. I think Drew also said in the morning that profitability is something that should not be something that the standard should hinder. So I'll just throw this question to all the panelists, and
What's the question?
whether the technology neutrality, the standards is promoting technology neutrality, right? But then our industry is split between preference of technology, right? Some just needs hybrids, and some have a preference for the electrification. So is it that we are lacking behind from the communication point of view, that we are not able to convince the industry, right? And what should be our take? So Mangesh, or Rashmi ma'am, you can go ahead.
At the discussion, I mean that's a very interesting point. I think government should think, why are we doing it? We are doing it for the society. We are doing it for the climate. We are doing it for the people. And if we are able to answer that question, I think we will be doing a good job. Coming to this specific situation, I think we know that the industry is going to be divided. They will have their own solutions. It's the government who has to decide what is good for the majority. We can't push targets which are not, of course, achievable by industry. We should have a dialogue. That's the way most of the, and we heard earlier discussion also how in USA the development of regulations has taken place. So consultation with the industry is very, very paramount. But I think the industry in India is not yet come to that level where government can wait for the industry to take a direction. Government should push certain things in the right direction, and it's from that point of the view that I mentioned earlier that we should have a mixed approach, sectoral approach. We should have also a reality towards how the energy mix is. So can we afford to go electrified by 2035, or are we yet ready? So those are the kind of questions in the long run that government should step in.
Just kind of tying together what Anumita ma'am and Rashmi ma'am said earlier, okay, with the greater good in mind, and with the 2070 net zero vision in mind, right? If a long-term sort of policy can be put in place, which can be industry agnostic, technology agnostic, it is for the greater good. Net zero is the target. And then with sufficient time on hand, if a dialogue can be had, right, then I think we can go back to Drew's point about profitability as well. Everyone has sufficient time to prioritize profits and still sort of deliver something which is good enough for the greater good, sort of, right? That's all.
So to address your question, Ashok, and very squarely, you are very right that currently the technology biases in the industry is actually holding up a lot of change and the progress that we need to see. The bias, when it is in favor of intermediate technologies, the transitional technologies, and that's where a lot of confusion is getting created. So it can be hybrid, it can be ethanol, it can be mixed fuel, and so clearly these are the transitional strategies. But this is really not the time to get lost in transitional strategies. Because if we really have to see the big change forward, then we can't be hesitant about it. You really need to give target to where we need to be and cannot delay that timeline anymore. Now, the question is, and I do see, and to say it very frankly, that the current war that I see between EV versus hybrid, right? And in that, it's interesting to see that already hybrids are actually getting concession, whether that is under FAME or even the multiplier numbers under the current CAFE, right? But what we have to ensure, so it is not that we are not incentivizing them. That should not be the thought. But what we have going forward, what is important to ensure that the differential between the incentive for the transitional technologies and EV, that gap should not narrow down. It should be even wider, right? And with the incentive for transitional to phase out very quickly. I mean, that should be our broad approach. And if we do not do that, then we are not going to build scale. We will not get the advantage of this economy of scale, right, which is needed, all the price points, cost of transition that we are talking about. In fact, there is a very important lesson from the electric bus market, which is a very success story in India. The fact that with the way that this FAME policy was designed and the demand aggregation, that India has been able to reduce prices, and they are saying that even without subsidy, you can actually buy an electric bus in India today. And that's the reason why government could actually have an ambition for 50,000 buses by 2027, keeping in mind that such a big, sharp fall has happened that on per kilometer basis, the bus price could be competitive or even lower than diesel buses. That's where we are. So this means that the regulations have to build competition, and the manufacturers will have to compete with each other to sell the EVs, the ultimate technology, whatever that is, but not get lost in the transitional technologies. When the industry is competing for the market, for the technology, that will also bring down the cost. So the cost is not only a function of more demand, because the demand can push up your prices, but the supply competition can reduce your prices. So that's the way we need to understand and design the regulations.
Absolutely, ma'am. Economy of scale is something that has been working in India in the past. I mean, India is a consumer of technologies, right? So for most of the technologies, it's always the economy of scale that works, and that's how Indian manufacturers have been reducing the cost of the technologies. So with this, I'll open the floor to audience for questions. You can raise their hands and then we'll give them the mic. So I can see 2 hands. So we'll take both these questions first.
I think that Euro norms are coming up in Europe, Euro 7, and India is also working on framing new regulations for Bharat Stage 7, which are expected to be complex because they are going to have, emissions on tires, brakes, etc. So is India, prepared for that kind of, evolution challenge, because whenever that happens, we find that, the capital cost, goes up, and basically, OEMs basically are not able to, try to produce, vehicles for as far as, masses are concerned. We found that, SUVs are getting sold, because SUVs are able to give lot larger profit to these big manufacturers after this Bharat Stage 6 norms, Previously, there used to be small cars, compact cars. They are basically not being produced simply because, the economics don't work. So do you find that, that this is going to be able to, these norms will be able to, work for the benefit of for the economies of scale, Thanks very much.
And the second question, I think we'll take 2 questions and then we can answer that.
My question is to Rashmi ma'am and Mr. Kodjak. So with respect to emissions from tire, it is somewhat related to the question already asked. The tire particulate emission, which is there, it's a major problem. So just wanted to understand what is happening currently globally to curtail the particulate emissions that happen from tire. And in terms of, what's been happening in India and what are the what's the plan ahead? And with respect to ICCT, what is it that, what is the current work that you're doing on this, and how do you plan to, take forward this challenge?
I just had a follow-up question on SUVs itself. So SUVs, as we all know, are challenging today. But recently I was reading that in the US particularly, there is a trend towards trying to sell lighter vehicles again, purely because in the EV sector, the economics makes much more sense to sell smaller, more compact vehicles. So is there a similar trend that can be seen or sort of guided through the various regulatory avenues that are available to us, including the CAFE norms? Just wondering if there are any insights on that, moving away from SUVs and towards lighter vehicles.
I would like to answer what is the progress on BS7. Yes, of course, India must migrate to the next stage emission norms. It is in Indian government's policy to have a look at what is happening globally and also internally examine the readiness of technology, readiness of test facility, readiness of capabilities to develop those technologies. So with that in view, a lot of discussion have already started. The dialogue is basically when and to what extent we align with European regulations. I think government will soon announce as and when the emission committee gets ready with the draft in agreement with all the stakeholders. Coupled with it is the question, what happens to the SUVs and bigger engines? Obviously, rest of the other countries have also seen this dilemma that with the tightening of emission norms, the brand comes on heavier vehicles, heavier engines, and therefore the technological development is slightly different than as compared to the smaller engines. In India also, the migration is quite clearly seen that per kilowatt, the miles run on vehicles, there is a clear shift happening, and SUVs are have to get ready with the next level technologies. Coming to also the question related to tire, as we get closer or tighter on emission regulations, other sources become quite significant, and that's exactly where the tire emission has really been seen as a challenge. Even the measurement of tire emissions needs a very challenging atmosphere, very challenging test facilities, and to control it is another matter altogether. So, but of course, in the interest of environment, that is the direction which has been taken. And India is also, as far as ARAI is concerned, we had proposed some work related to that, because our temperatures for roads are quite different, and tire wear in India is quite predominant. So it's a significant aspect in any case. So that needs attention. So next stage emission norms will obviously address those concerns. So these are my inputs.
Drew, can you share your thoughts from the US
Yeah,
side?
I'll try to address the question, the last question, which is on the size of electric vehicles. And I'm going to try to answer it in a couple different ways. The first way is just to talk about what the market is doing. So in the US, and I don't really know the European market or the Chinese market very well, because I've been really focused on the US for at least the last year, so forgive me for that. But in the US market, unfortunately, most of the electric vehicles, I guess I would say from the legacy manufacturers, putting Tesla aside, and Tesla dominates the actual sales, but putting Tesla aside, the General Motors and Ford and Stellantis and et cetera, a lot of the new electric vehicles are versions of larger vehicles, not smaller vehicles. You know, compact or even large SUVs, for example. Ford has electrified its Ford F-150, the Ford F-150 Lightning. And I think what the General Motors tried to electrify the Hummer. And I think the manufacturers are doing that because they have larger profit margins in those types of vehicles, and they can still make profits even though at this point in their trajectory of EV sales, you know, before costs come down, they're having trouble making profits. So there's, unfortunately, and also sort of a lot of domestic manufacturers in the U.S. have almost gotten out of the car business, right? So they don't have even cars to electrify for the most part. I guess the Ford Mach-E was I mean, even that I think has gotten pretty big. So maybe that's just so the market seems to be, at least in the early stages, creating electrification of the larger vehicles, not the smaller vehicles, for profitability purposes. From a societal perspective, a climate perspective, the size of the batteries that are necessary to, you know, be used in those vehicles are quite large, and that will eventually slow down the transition because you need a certain amount of green electrons and materials to charge those. So that's not a good result either. We don't really have a good regulatory mechanism for driving smaller electric vehicles. You could argue that plug-in hybrids have smaller batteries, and they go, and as long as the consumer is charging, they'll ideally get a lot of electric miles on a relatively smaller battery. That's one way of trying to deal with the resource constraint issue. So that's my best shot at answering your question, which I think started with the idea that isn't it more profitable, if I'm understanding you correctly, to electrify smaller vehicles? And that's not what we're seeing, at least in the United States, right? For many of the legacy, I will see the Tesla Model 3, you know, had 30% profitability early on, right? Anyway, I'll stop there. Maybe I'm misunderstanding your question. Happy to talk more about it at the break, but that's what I got.
I think we are running out of time. So we had an interesting discussion today, and we have touched upon a lot of points to take the conversation forward. And the most important that I liked is that it should not be a missed opportunity for India. So we should really take it forward, and probably EV can be a future, and it will spur growth and opportunity for everyone. It will increase the competitiveness in the Indian market. So thanks a lot. With this, I'll close this discussion. So my hearty thanks to all the panelists.